When Stephen was talking to me about his presentation over the phone, I thought, oh, Stephen has to go first because it links so well and it leads so nicely into my application of thinking about surveillance and stigma within the context of doing interviews and being in community with folks who have been surveilled and stigmatized. So absolutely understanding the ways in which folks experience surveillance, experience policing, experience violence, experience stigma, because I'm starting to think about stigma as a mechanism of surveillance, more so now that I'm in a criminology department, which is one of the benefits of coming to the criminology department, in terms of my conceptual thinking and frameworks that I'm using. But all of this comes to bear on the research experience is what I'm trying to say. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. So just a little more. So I've mainly focused on stigma as my orientation towards understanding the ways in which justice involved, particularly women, are experiencing their reentry process, and how they're experiencing particularly the different systems that they're seeking reentry into. So not just reentry into society, but reentry into their family system with their children, their moms, their community, yes, with child welfare systems, with state systems, the myriad systems they interface with post-incarceration as they're trying to reconnect and rebond and reconstruct their lives. And I even have a paper about them reconstructing their identities. So I think it's more than their lives, but their identities. So I want to start with saying absolutely qualitative interviewing. So I'm primarily a qualitative interviewer. I should start by saying that. So it can be absolutely empowering, even therapeutic. And it's also seen as a political endeavor for redressing biased knowledge. So allowing folks, communities to engage in this process to address what's seen, what's thought, what's considered about them, about their lived experiences, having this context for them to address that, to redress that. And for community-based researchers, this process, I call it a process, becomes incredibly important of helping folks to tell their stories. And so we play a critical part in facilitating that storytelling. And it's in large part because of what Stephen is talking about, because of what I'm going to talk about, the multiple forms of stigma that communities have faced who are coming to be interviewed, to be a part of this research process. Because all of that absolutely plays a part in what we hear and how they experience the research endeavor. And so I focus mainly on formerly incarcerated Black women, because they're one such I'm sorry, you were about to take a picture. They're one such, do you want me to advance back?
No, it's okay.
Okay. They're one such community that faces myriad forms of stigma and surveillance. And so in terms of intersectional stigma, absolutely we know this, the research shows, particularly women who've been incarcerated have these myriad kind of intersecting experiences of drug use, yes, incarceration, impaired mothering, which I argue in many of my papers that, the distinct caregiving identity and function that women have been unable to engage in because of incarceration, but also because of their addiction, creates, communicates another form of stigma, and oftentimes women who have been incarcerated have engaged in sex work and or are assumed to, because I've heard women say there's assumptions because I have an addiction experience, there's assumptions from people in my community, from even potential romantic partners, that I've engaged in sex, survival sex, exchange sex for resources. So that's another layer of the intersecting of stigmas that they are experiencing and trying to navigate. So it's these challenges which make formerly incarcerated Black women really vulnerable participants in community-based research. So you all know this because I learned this here like 3 years ago. So So stigma raises ethics-specific concerns. We absolutely know that. We know that from the research that folks who are coming in, communities, marginalized communities who are interviewing, are expressing that amidst the research process, there's perceptions of stigma, there could be perceptions of shame, distress. Someone who was here who I missed, wow, I forgot her name. She does work on sex work. She's published with you. She was just here. Faith was telling me that she was here. Shira, yes. I'm quoting her here, her work. So it's well known and well evidenced that the research process can create these perceptions of stigma. So considering the intersectional stigmas, the myriad stigmas that Black women face, it's important to think about that. And so I added at the end that I am starting to think about stigma as a form of surveillance. So, feel free to push back if you want. I welcome it, but I'll probably use that word a lot as I'm starting to look at stigma as that. Or maybe you all have already been doing that and I'm new to that word of thinking of stigma as surveillance. So, current study, actually this is my study from RETI. I've done so many, well not so many, but I've done a few. I'm like, oh wait, this is my RETI study, and I'm at RETI. Okay, I'm used to presenting this but not being here. So this is the work I did here. So this study explores how 28 formerly incarcerated Black women experienced the research interview process. And so I did this study when I was at Binghamton University. I interviewed 28 Black women who were in a drug treatment mandated program while they were trying to re-enter. They were released within 2 years. They had been released within 2 years of participating in this study. All were on parole. Sorry, I have a slight stutter that comes and goes. And I used a cab throughout my process. They were very integral. On my cab, there was the director of the reentry program in Binghamton. There was a formerly justice-involved woman who was now an advocate. I had 2 women such as that, and with those background experiences. And I had a woman that was working in the drug treatment facility that I was recruiting from. So that was my cab makeup. So actually, the director of the reentry program, he also had justice involvement experiences. So most folks on my cab had previous justice involvement. Wow, that's been so long. So it's not really a current study, but I'm still, but we know the nature of research. You're writing and publishing way after the study is over. So this study actually bared so much fruit, so thank you, I appreciate that. It helps me in my tenure, my process. So here are my findings. So women share multiple myriad experience of stigma and surveillance within the research context. This quote made me think of Stephen, so I added it at the last minute. It made me think of his great presentation. So this is a statement from one of the women in my study. These POs are quick to tell you you're out here smoking crack, or if you wasn't running around after this guy or doing what they do, you wouldn't be here. So here, we see these perceptions that women who are coming out are here because they use these drugs, they use crack, also because they were running after a guy or trying to get the attention of a guy, or even, which I heard women saying, trying to do things that men do. So that also brings in a gendered nature, you're doing things you're not supposed to be doing. Also a sense of not having your own kind of compass to make the right kind of decisions, the supposed right kinds of decisions, and so I definitely saw this as a way of communicating one stigma, a stigma of you have you are being devalued, you are being monitored because of the ways in which you have not conformed to norm behavior in terms of your drug use, in terms of you're assumed being attached to a man that's involved in problematic and deviant behaviors. Here's another quote. I think black women are judged more harshly. We are criminals, not like white women. They are looked on different, innocent. We deserve it. So that's her saying, unlike them, we are seen as deserving it. We left our kids to get high. This quote is really great. In the sense of we see all these different intersections, identities coming together. So this participant is saying she feels judged or perceived as being less than or marked because she's black, but also because she's been incarcerated, and she juxtaposes this with white women and that value, that presumed kind of innocence of whiteness, or even the way whiteness allows one to feel less tarnished by their criminality, which I've been starting to think a lot about.
Right, just really quick, so the context here, like the POs are parole officers, or who are they? I'm so sorry. I'm just curious, like when they're talking, were they clear about who they saw that judgment coming from, or was it more like it's in the water and everybody thinks this?
Right, well, this is definitely about the POs.
And
the parole officers.
Okay, awesome.
Versus, do you mean versus probation officers? Is that what you meant?
I just wasn't sure.
Police officers. Oh, you're right. Absolutely. POs could mean, I'm sorry, I'm so used to hearing PO and folks meaning the parole officers. Yes, so parole officers. And, in terms of this quote, because these women were highly systemed, I was getting them when they were just coming out of incarceration. They were seeing their parole officer all of the time. They also were mandated to treatment. This statement absolutely would apply to how they saw the state system, the state, community corrections, whether that's a parole officer. I'd also say as we go on, you'll hear that there's a quote where one of the women is talking about the way she experiences even drug treatment. So I don't know if that answers.
But it's not just the research context.
No.
Right? So the slide says within the research context.
Oh yeah, not yet. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I am moving.
And then we'll discuss the
I'm
research
moving
context.
so fast. Yeah. So this is about them first telling me, well, this is how I experience stigma and surveillance, and then they'll talk about how this impacts them within the research context. Thank you for asking that. Yeah. So here are these experiences of stigma and surveillance that they're experiencing in the world, as Stephen talked about. And so then when they're talking, when I'm now asking them about their experiences within the research context, one participant said, so here a participant discusses the potential stigma due to researchers' condescending language and mannerisms, and she says, so my stories are not for someone to shame me. So in this quote, and you'll find the rest of the quote in one of my papers that I sent to Rima to give to you all, but in this quote, she's saying, these are the stigmas I walk in. This is the anticipation of being stigmatized that I bring to bear on this research experience. And for her, it's around not wanting her story to be shamed. And it's not just a story about being incarcerated, but as you would see in my papers, a lot of this is stories about their addiction and how their addiction criminalized them and led them into pathways of being incarcerated, which now has led to further surveillance even post-incarceration. So that shame is not just around incarceration, it's also around how they experience their addiction and how they see other people valuing them now because of their addiction. And she's bringing all this to bear in the research experience, and she's anticipating or fearful of shame from researchers, However, women discuss the research process as offering alternative counter spaces, which I thought that was really powerful for reframing their experiences of stigma, trauma, and surveillance. Those that I talked about some on the first slide, So this is one quote, and there was quite a few. Just want to tell you how I'm feeling. The mental health people think I'm so crazy. They think I can't take care of my kids. I try to take out some words. We need to throw it all up. Talk about it like here. So here, this woman is saying, here, I feel comfortable to speak my truth. I feel comfortable to tell my story. However, when I'm within mental health facilities, getting care, getting mental health services, there is absolutely a fear that they will think I'm quote unquote crazy, or they might want to take my kid. They may decide that I'm not fit to have my child. However, she's saying here, we need to throw it all up and talk about it. And I noticed a lot of women talking about research as a place to not just disclose, but tell their story, even rethink their story. In one of my papers, every time I tell my story, I was like, wow, this is great. They talked a great deal about, wow, I'm here talking about my story of addiction, and I'm thinking about myself in a different way. I'm thinking about my journey in a different way, and I'm feeling empowered to think about what I can do with my story. Their testimony, and even seeing themselves as wounded healers, which is a paper I'm really trying to work on more now. So this reframing that they're doing allows them to imagine themselves as wounded healers in ways that further their recovery. And they talk a great deal about this. And in fact, when I was a doctoral student at the University of Chicago, and I was interviewing women who were in residential drug treatment, who had been incarcerated, I saw this a great deal there too. A lot of women talk about what they want to do, how they want to use their shame and their stories of trauma and surveillance to help others. So, and this is a quote that speaks to this: your ministry is what tried to break you. Your testimony is how you use it. So they absolutely, I know that sounds really powerful. They absolutely see the women in my research, they absolutely talked a great deal about how the research context is a space for them to tell their story, in a way that they can't in alternative spaces that are seen as traditional spaces of healthcare, where they're being, yes, absolutely diagnosed, surveilled, monitored, so it's a counter space, and it's a space for them to rethink how they've even experienced their own journey, which absolutely could promote their recovery and healing, so implications. Participants discuss the importance of researchers the sharing of power. And so I remember a few participants mentioned how you kept asking my permission and checking in to see if I was okay. So, quite a few of the participants, in the debriefing, when I asked them what did they see as the risks of participating, the benefits, how did they experience this research process, quite a few mentioned that I kept stopping the interview to kind of check in on them, ask their permission to keep going, see if they were okay. And I'm doing this thinking, this is the ethical part of this process, but for them it meant more, and I saw this as a way of sharing the power, in the sense of allowing them, making sure that they intentionally and explicitly knew you could stop this at any time, and I'm going to keep telling you this as you tell me these experiences of trauma that are highly sensitive, that may, be difficult for you. I want you to know throughout that process that you could stop this at any time, and that I'm checking in on you also. validating their stories of trauma and triumph. One woman said, even if I'm a hooker, validate me. You made me feel like you noticed my efforts to overcome. Yeah. And then there's research vulnerability, which I do think, could be part of the process of validating their stories. And that's us discussing our journey. So how the researcher being vulnerable in the sense of, this is how I came to this practice. This is how I came to doing this kind of research. This becomes a powerful kind of mechanism for creating a space of trust, but also showing that, this is probably, I don't know, I'd be really curious to hear what you all think. This is interesting with the power dynamics and the hierarchies that exist in research to say that, make yourself vulnerable by telling your story. But so one woman said, and the fact that you talk about your work in the community, she said a lot more than that, and it's in one of the papers that I sent you. But I actually heard quite a few women talk about how they appreciated me telling my story, telling them how did I get to doing work with women who had been incarcerated, who had drug use experiences. They noted how they saw me around, even before the physical research, the formal research process. They talked about seeing me around, talking, sitting and observing. And so all of that matters, it mattered. And so that's really it. Yeah.